Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Well, we're back in Trumpville, Washington, D.C. I'm telling you, this town is on edge. As a matter of fact, just walking into the studio today, this fell from the ceiling, and I barely escaped death. Is it a plot? Is there something going on? Stacey?
Yes, we're here pre-inauguration because you don't want to be here on inauguration because lots of those sort of things can be falling. I'm checking Twitter to make sure the world is still on outside the studio because Trump and his tweets are a big story, and it appears that the tweetings will continue until morale improves.
The tweets will continue until morale improves.
That's right, because Trump and his tweets have been rocking markets for the last few months since he became president-elect. I want to talk about what he's been doing to Ford and General Motors. The car companies are his latest tweet stream. General Motors and Chrysler report December domestic sale gains of 10%. This is from MarketWatch. In the spirit of fake news, this is actually incorrect. Chrysler actually had a decline in sales. It was General Motors and the Chevy Cruze and the Chevy Malibu and all those sort of cars and their trucks that boomed, but Chrysler was down. But they had a photo of Trump in this tweet, so I stuck with this one because I thought it looked better.
Well, you know, the Obama administration chose to bail out the auto industry, and the Trump administration is choosing to fundamentally restructure the global auto industry. It's a roughly $1 trillion industry, and it needs to be restructured, and he's getting Mexico to relocate.
Not Mexico, but Ford.
Ford is pulling, relocating out of Mexico and into the U.S., and he's fundamentally re-architecting how business is done, which is a difference in their approach to the previous administration, going back quite a number of decades.
But usually the previous administration and all administrations before Obama did policy via the legislative branch, via their cabinet, not directly through Twitter. So I have this headline: Trump tweets, Ford and GM counter, their shares jump, the peso plunges, but the jobs won't come back to the USA. This is from wolfstreet.com, and he says President-elect Trump has been hounding individual businesses with his drive-by tweets to knock them around some, get their shares to sink, and cut some deals. Last year, he singled out Ford, Carrier, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Amazon, and others. Now companies have set up damage control teams to prepare for and counter a hit of this type.
Well, remember Henry Ford, he realized that, hey, why not create more consumers of my car? I'll raise the wage of my employees. And he created more car buyers. Here you have Trump coming in and saying something that previously would be a reason for that stock to trade down. It actually traded up because here you're going to create a lot of consumers, a lot of jobs are going to be buying stuff, and the optimism is high. Remember, American confidence is rising, and of course that's the basis of the American economy, is confidence, because there's very little to support the global domination that the U.S. has other than the confidence of the American consumer. As long as that confidence is in place, then the Trump plan will work.
You know, this is a unique moment in world history and U.S. history where the president-elect can tweet at individual companies, whether it's Boeing, and say, hey, Air Force One's costing $4 billion. What a ripoff. And then their shares sink, and then Boeing comes out and says, actually, we'll work with you. We'll cut the deal. We'll make the price lower.
Look, I was in D.C. a couple of years ago with the Creative Coalition, which is a Hollywood lobby group. And, I noticed that it's antiquated and technologically behind the times. Like we'd be having meetings with senators and congressmen and people like this, and then like a bell would go off and they say, oh no, we have to go vote. And they'd all get up and they'd walk down a myriad of corridors, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, why don't you just, get on your computer? Why don't you just get with the 20th century at that point? This is before the 21st century started. So Trump is saying, look, technology has transformed industry. Technology has transformed many industries. Why not politics? And Twitter is the beginning of that. Why not bring in streamlined technologies to give direct participatory democracy to 320 million Americans? All the voting Americans, excuse me. The voting Americans, why not give them the right to participate directly, have various referendums, have votes, have people involved?
So in this case of Ford, you mentioned at the top of the show that Ford has decided not to build a factory that they were going to build in Mexico. It was over $1 billion. Instead, they're going to reinvest $700 million in Detroit on a factory that will build these basically autonomous cars, driverless cars. But in terms of the theme of the show is that the tweetings will continue until morale improves. So here you have a president-elect basically tweeting at individual companies, their share price, it moves markets. It moves up to $1 billion, $2 billion off the market cap of a company in the flash of, in the push of a tweet. You know, he tweets it and the markets crash. Here, Ford announced this. They were on the news, and the tweet from Forex Insight reads, Ford, Trump's pro-business policies influenced Mexico decision. So they were on the news. Their decision was already kind of planned, but they're saying that we're doing this in order to appease Trump. And market and Wall Street says that Ford was playing along to stop the tweets. They wanted the tweets to stop from Donald Trump, president-elect.
What's the old saying? Something like a week is a long time in politics, or, you know, alluding to the fact that things change very quickly. Look, we're entering a new century where the key prefix is nano, as in nanotechnology, nanometers, nanoseconds, and the political lifespan of an idea can last a nanosecond. And Trump is taking full advantage of that by communicating to millions of followers in the global news media outlets with 140 characters in a tweet. I mean, I suppose the only way to stop it would be for, let's say, Soros or Buffett or somebody like this to buy Twitter, the company. I think it's worth $13 or $14 billion. They could do a buyout of this company, I'm sure, for not that many billions of dollars, given the combined wealth of these folks, and simply shut it down or eliminate Trump or go after it that way. Do a hostile raid of Twitter, the company, for $15, $20, $25 billion. And get rid of them that way. I'm surprised that hasn't already started. I think after this show airs, you'll see a pop in Twitter stock. I'm not trading on Twitter stock. I'm not participating in Twitter stock. I'm not in any way benefiting from this idea. But I will suggest that the way to stop Trump is to do a leveraged buyout of Twitter. If not, shut up. Just shut up and let the guy get in there and make the changes he needs to make.
Again, he's going after Ford, he's going after GM, he's going after these car companies because, of course, these are where the manufacturing jobs are. These are where he won Michigan, Wisconsin, all these sort of places. This is the manufacturing heartland, the Rust Belt that voted for him, and he's showing them immediately. He's not even waiting until he's in office. He's not waiting for the first 100 days. He's not waiting for the first 100 hours. He's just going for it and doing it and appeasing his voters. Since it costs 40% less to build these cars in Mexico, CNN asked, what will the new administration do to make it right for your business? Did he say he's going to stop the tweets and the attacks against Ford? CNN asked him. And the CEO of Ford said, no, I don't think we got into that level, Field said. He was just very appreciative for the announcements that we're making. Then he explained reality and to heck with the Trump deal hoopla. So he basically said it's a more, you know, that it was kind of planned, that they were planning on this because sales have declined and blah, blah, blah. But it's funny that CNN asked the CEO of Ford, did he promise to stop the tweets?
Yeah, well, look, we live in an era where economic policy is guided in large part by automatic trading and program trading and algorithmic trading on Wall Street that changes prices that then changes the news. The news reports on fake prices. And then that informs a cycle and a loop of information that will change prices again and change the news cycle again. This unholy cycle of fake prices creating fake news. And a lot of people in the mainstream media in America don't understand the connection between so-called fake news and fake prices. They think that fake news is unto itself the goal of, or the objective thereof, the powers that be. That's incorrect. You must start with fake prices. Fake prices are what they're trying to do first, and it generates fake news.
Okay, but let's talk about the, you know, fake hope that we had in the president leaving, because here is what many say is kind of a doofus. They call him an orange monster, an orange crazy man. Like, they call him all sorts of names. And yet he could just tweet in 140 characters and force Boeing to capitulate, force Ford to capitulate, force GM to capitulate. Obama did similar, but in a secretive kind of way where he did all those executive orders. Okay, I can't convince the Congress and the Senate to do what I want, so I'm going to do these executive orders. Here, it's kind of open, transparent negotiations happening. Here's Trump going like, we're going to put a tax on you, an import tax on you, Ford and GM, and they're like, okay, don't do it. Stop the tweets. We'll capitulate.
Look, the First Amendment is freedom of speech, and the mainstream media in America got it in their head that they became the guardian of speech in America. They're not the guardian of speech in America. They don't need to interpret the news for us and hide stories like the New York Times has done repeatedly and not inform the American public in ways that would give them an informed decision-making process. That's why WikiLeaks and Julian Assange filled the vacuum, filled the void, because mainstream media in America, the Washington Post in particular, the New York Times, have become parodies of themselves. They're not news-gathering organizations anymore. They're not investigative journalists. They are corporate. And if Trump can bust that cycle with a tweet, that's great. So what do we have? Is this the end? Is this the apocalypse? Is this the Trump-alypse?
What's
no.
Trump-lips? What are Trump-lips?
Is this the Trump-alypse? No, because we have the Constitution. It's still in place. He's not overriding the Constitution. It's still there. The Constitution is government by and for the people. You've got checks and balances. And is he a doofus? You know, the point is that he doesn't have to reinvent the country from scratch. He just has to follow the directions. It's called the U.S. Constitution.
On this, Wolf Street says this is crony capitalism. I'll end it on this bit of the quote from the story about the drive-by tweets, and the tweeting will continue until morale improves. This is what this new and higher form of crony capitalism boils down to. Trump threatens a company with a tweet. The company responds in some twisted way that might include kowtowing to Trump while driving up its stock price. In return, it expects some real favors from the administration.
Look, the stock prices are going to be driven higher until they start to fall apart and go down. I mean, that'll be the test to see how much folks are encouraged by this mad tweeting spree when the stock market takes a 2, 3, 4% dump one day, and the Dow Jones is down at 2, 3, 4,000 points, and then we'll see, you know, what tests people's mettle. I would say,
wait,
you know.
Wait. Trump is just tweeting. That Keiser report with Max Keiser. He doesn't talk enough about me, and he called me a doofus. He's watching us now.
Well, that's fantastic. We'll have to get Trump on the phone or tweet back. Don't go away. Much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Tyson Slocum. He is the director of the Public Citizens Energy Program. Tyson, welcome.
Great to be here.
All righty. Donald Trump is about to be inaugurated. He's nominated Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State. You wrote an article for CNN.com saying Tillerson is the wrong choice. Why is he wrong?
Well, he's wrong because he is an inherent conflict of interest, because we don't know where Tillerson's advocacy for the U.S. national interest begins and where his advocacy for Exxon's interests ends.
So it's kind of like Dick Cheney. He had that conflict of interest over at Halliburton.
I see this as even bigger, because at least Dick Cheney had some prior record of government service at a variety of different levels. Dick Cheney had served as a member of Congress. He served as a cabinet-level position. Rex Tillerson has none of that. His only thing on his resume for the last 40 years has been an employee of ExxonMobil.
Yeah, it's interesting. The choice of the cabinet in Washington these days, looking out there at the pool of talent, and it's everyone's compromised at this point in the American system. At this point in the cycle, after 30 years of neoliberalism, of pay for play,
right.
Congress trades on inside information routinely. The swamp is pretty thick and deep, and so there's an argument to be made that why not just bring the biggest swamp creature from the swamp out there and have him, do deals. I mean, Thomas Jefferson, one of the founders of the Democratic Party, said, "Commerce with all nations, alliance with none." So he's a deal maker. Why not have a big deal maker in as Secretary of State?
He's a deal maker, but the problem is that when you're representing an extractive corporation like an Exxon, you've got very unique types of relationships with countries that you don't necessarily see in other types of industries. This puts ExxonMobil and Rex Tillerson.
Why extractive is unique versus, let's say, the business of Monsanto, which is an extraordinarily dangerous, pernicious, horrible business. They started the Ukrainian war. They're pushing into Russia. They're expansionist, corporate, behemoth, monstrous people with Victoria Nuland and her husband, lobbying the government, and they think they own the government. I mean, that seems like a lot worse than Rex Tillerson. Rex Tillerson didn't actually start a war like Victoria Nuland did.
Well, actually, he kind of did. In 2011, he cut this deal as the head of Exxon with the quasi-independent Kurdish region in Iraq that happens to be oil-rich. He did this because Baghdad, the central government of Iraq, wasn't giving him terms that he liked. So he just went ahead and unilaterally sidestepped Baghdad and cut this deal with the Kurds. That ran against what U.S. policy was at the time, and it led to actual fighting on the border.
Is the U.S. policy other than to just go get a lot of oil and kill people? I mean, we saw that in Iraq, we've seen it in Afghanistan, we see it all over the world. I mean, the U.S. policy is kill people, grab their oil. So how is that different?
Well, I don't know that was explicitly U.S. policy under the Obama administration.
No, but it's the obvious U.S. policy under all administrations going back decades, in that the U.S. simply is a warmongering, not to use too fine a point, but they like to go to countries, steal their oil, and kill people. I mean, that's pretty much the policy. So why not just have a guy who's maybe they try something different? Maybe not pretend like that's not the policy. Maybe say that is the policy, and maybe go to countries like Russia and others and say, you know what, we're all in it for the energy anyway. Maybe we can do it in a better way, more efficient, more productive, more why not?
Well, if we are going to assume that petrodiplomacy should be a hallmark of U.S. foreign policy, it's kind of dated. That's very 20th century. The fact is that the future of the economy, the future of what's going to be powering industry and our households and our transportation sector is not going to be oil, okay? Now, that's not going to happen overnight, but the CEO of Shell did say last month that he saw global oil demand peaking in the next 15 years. So what we are going to see is a gradual decline in the importance of oil as a diplomatic issue. And so putting someone like Rex Tillerson, just assuming this narrative of, we've always been about oil and foreign policy, so let's just continue that by putting Exxon CEO as Secretary of State. The problem is that it exposes us to the problem that the future of the global economy is going to be increasingly
interesting point
on
there,
oil.
in that, for example, in the solar business, the price of solar energy is crashing, of producing solar energy. It's now competitive with coal. It's cheaper than coal. It's cheaper than these extractive fossil fuel industries, and that does seem to pose an enormous shift in the entire energy matrix, for sure. And how do you see that playing out? So let's take your case here. Let's say you've got Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, Exxon guy, and they go to the petro foreign policy, but the hydrocarbon industry crashes. Solar, we see what happens to solar, what P2P, Napster did to the music industry.
Right.
It's disruptive. So where's the clash there? How does the U.S. deal with that? I think you're right. So what happens?
I'm not sure. It depends upon what kind of leadership we have.
Wait a minute, you're not sure. You're over there at the Public Citizens Energy Program. You're supposed to know this stuff.
Well,
what would Ralph Nader say? He founded that organization, right?
That is correct.
All right. Does he have no plan either? What's going on over there?
Well, no. So the issue here is whether or not the United States is going to continue to pursue a policy of protecting and coddling these monopolistic industries like the fossil fuel industries at the expense of, as you termed it, the disruptive technologies that are disruptive only to those incumbent fossil fuel industries.
They will.
They're liberating to everybody else that can.
Let's assume that they resist the disruption.
Right.
What can be done? Listen, in the technology industry, we've seen this before with, let's say, the free software movement, which took over and totally changed the software industry. As I mentioned, P2P file swapping and this type of thing has changed, and people had to adapt their business models. But it was driven by essentially individual technologists on the ground who are connecting through networks and changing this possibility. Is it possible? Let's say this. Let's say a country like Africa, which is going heavy, or not.
Continent.
A continent. How can I make that mistake? Let's say a continent like Africa, which is already going into solar in a big way, they become hugely energy efficient. They start exporting energy. They attach to the grid, and they're now energy exporters. And now they just can they potentially competitively put a lien on the legacy companies?
Possibly. I think the future is going to be in the manufacturing of the components used to produce renewable energy, because the big difference between renewable energy and fossil fuel industry is with fossil fuels, you need continuous fuel supply that is owned or controlled, typically by a corporation, sometimes by national interests, that have to continually fuel that vehicle, that power plant to make the energy you need. With renewable energy, the fuel cost is zero, because your fuel cost is sunlight, it is the wind blowing, and because Elon Musk of Tesla just finished finally the gigafactory out in the Nevada desert, we're going to see within the next 5 years energy storage in a lot of places in the United States be comparable to what utilities are charging us to get access to the grid. So those are the sea change things. So I think those countries, those societies that prioritize manufacturing of all of the necessary components to power a renewable economy, who are securing the patents that are going to be collecting royalties on the production of those facilities.
Well, what country's leading in that regard?
Well, right now, Germany has the most patents and some of the largest manufacturing capacity.
And there are towns in Germany where people have the solar panels on their home. They're actually collecting more energy than they need over the course of the year, and they're selling it back to the grid.
Right,
So
which is insane when you look at where Germany is on the globe, what its latitude is. It's somewhere up near Canada. They have no business being...
But Buckminster Fuller, I think, once pointed out that the amount of energy the Earth receives from the sun every single day is 1,000 times greater than what's used
Absolutely.
on a daily basis. So
Absolutely.
It's just a matter of efficiencies to grab that energy. What about, so Rex Tillerson is scheduled to be sworn in. And,
well, he's got to have confirmation hearings
he's got to be
first.
confirmed, right? So you're a Washington guy, okay? So how is that going to play out? Is it going to be a lot of resistance, or what do you think is going to happen?
Well, that's what we're working on, building that resistance right now. So we're seeing a lot of concern. So he has to first get hearings with the Foreign Relations Committee in the U.S. Senate. You know, the U.S. Constitution says the president can make certain nominations subject to advice and consent by the Senate. The Democrats changed the rules a couple of years ago to actually make it easier to confirm picks. It used to be a 60-vote threshold. Now it's a simple majority. So you're going to have all the Democrats unified, and you're going to have to get some Republicans. So here are the potential issues that might sink a Tillerson confirmation. One would be continued perception that he has an inherent conflict of interest. So Exxon tried to alleviate that on January 4th when they reached this financial agreement with Tillerson. He was due to receive 2 million restricted shares in ExxonMobil, which at today present value is worth about $180 million. So Exxon and Tillerson negotiated this trust agreement where those restricted shares in Exxon stock were going to be immediately converted into cash, put into this independent trust that will pay installments over 10 years to Tillerson. And that cash isn't going to be invested in Exxon, so they're saying, well, we think that it might be separate. The problem is that we've looked over this agreement and we saw a big glaring loophole. There's a non-compete clause buried in this thing that basically says whenever Tillerson leaves Secretary of State, he cannot go to any other oil and gas company for employment except ExxonMobil, right? So there is this appearance that Tillerson could return to the company in some fashion, probably as a consultant. That's a common pathway for former CEOs. So we still see that there is the potential for continued financial ties between Tillerson and the company. And when you combine that with the fact that all of his overseas experience in dealing with foreign heads of state, dealing with negotiations, have all been done in the capacity of working for Exxon. And so it really does blur the line of where Tillerson's allegiance is really going to lie. This is the only job he's ever had in his 40-plus year career. The other things that might sink him are some of the issues that he engaged in foreign affairs that ran directly counter to U.S. national interests. One was this deal that he negotiated with the independent Kurdish region of Iraq that led to 3 years of instability both within Iraq and with U.S. relations with Iraq, because Tillerson's side oil deal ran directly counter to U.S. interests as expressed by the Obama administration. So we've got this situation where he worked on this deal against U.S. national interests. He caught the State Department by surprise.
All right, you know what? This is fascinating. We're going to pick it up in a second segment.
Sure.
Because you're getting into the nitty-gritty.
All right.
So you must explore. All right, so stay right there. We'll do another segment. That's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our extraordinary guest, the one and only Tyson Slocum from the Public Citizens Energy Program. If you'd like to find us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.